Welcome to Open Door Cleveland. My guest today is Anthony the Boogieman Rucker. And if you don't know, he is an incredible talent. He's known by many folks here in Cleveland for the days that he was a spoken word artist, and I'm sure he still is. I can remember days when we both had venues at the Greenlight Shopping Center back in 1997. I can't even remember the name of the club down the way, but
me either.
Yeah, but I was at a place called Another Level, and at some time during the week, you were doing your thing at that other club, and you know it was really a great time for spoken word in Cleveland. But welcome to Open Door, Anthony the Boogieman Rucker.
Hey, thank you, sir.
Yeah, so tell us where you are these days. I know you're not in Cleveland anymore, so what's happening? You relocated, and where did you go and why?
Oh, wow. It's been a couple places. I initially went to New York, and I mean, because, like, you know, you hear about New York, it's the artist haven, it's the place to be if you want to create and do, and it lives up to the hype. You know, New York is a creator's paradise. There's always something going on. There's always something to do. Like there's a club, I think it's called Smalls, and it's a jazz club in Lower Manhattan that doesn't open up until like midnight and doesn't close until like 9 in the morning. Every hour they bring in another band, so you can go down there, listen to jazz all night and write. There's always some place to go and do so. I went out there, you know, searching, you know, for the Harlem Renaissance, you know, going out trying to figure out what was happening in the world. You know, doing 110 in Morningside. That's Abiodun Oyewale's Sunday venue where everybody comes through. And I mean everybody, actors, actresses, singers, poets, dancers. And every Sunday, you know, unless he's and even when he's out of town, you know, we will still come through. And, you know, then going to like, you know, historic spots like the Brooklyn Moon, the New York Cafe, and just living life as an artist, man, and was enjoying it. In the midst of everything, ended up getting married. And after getting married and getting pregnant, we decided that we didn't want to raise kids in New York. We decided between Atlanta and California. I wanted Atlanta. She wanted California. She won. We ended up in California. And then, you know, as life does, you know, changes happen. And I went from a full-time artist to a full-time husband, father, and career just became a second thing. Had some personal issues that I'm not getting into, but ended up going back to school. And now I'm a doctoral candidate in applied clinical psychology, and now just getting back to writing. But it was a period where there was a dearth, where there was very little of any writing. Like in maybe 10 years, I wrote maybe 7 or 8 poems, you know, just got caught up in personal issues, lost the creative spark. And now recently divorced, separated back in like 2014, and then I got back into the art, you know, and it helped me actually finish, you know, up the doctorate, you know, and like I said, right now I'm a doctoral candidate, and just getting back to me now, writing, have a one-man play I'm working on, have a couple poetry books I'm working on, one I just finished, and now I'm working on getting back to performing and living as an artist and a lecturer, but this time as a poet and a doctor, if that makes sense, which I guess poets are always have been, just unlicensed psychologists.
That is amazing, brother. That's absolutely amazing, because there's so many gaps that we have to fill in. And before we go any further, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, you know, since you brought up New York, the fact that you went to Showtime at the Apollo and you actually won Amateur Night more than once. And, you know, that's a phenomenon in itself when it comes to poetry and the spoken word. And there are others who, you know, use the same situation as a springboard. But then you mentioned applied chemical psychology, man, and that just sounds so far away from spoken word. So we're going to come back to that. But before we do, let's just talk
Oh,
about.
that's not chemical, clinical psychology.
Oh,
clinical.
clinical. Okay. Well, even so, clinical. Sorry, I misheard that word because I had never heard of chemical psychology. But
me either. So that's why I was like,
that's funny. We've created a new thing, chemical psychology, and there may be a chemical psychology once you think about it. Let's dissect that a little bit. I just want to get to the move that took place from Cleveland to New York and put that into perspective, with you living your life as an artist in Cleveland and then making that big leap, because it is a huge leap to go from a small pond to a big pond like New York City.
Yeah. So it was, I left Cleveland, I hate to say it, out of necessity. There's a verse in the Bible that says a prophet is not without honor except in his own home. So for me, believe it or not, I was performing a lot in Cleveland, but it was hard for me to make money because people were like, well, I knew you then and, you my boy and, you're supposed to be giving back. And so literally I was performing 4 or 5 times a week, but couldn't pay a bill because nobody wanted to pay me. And then, one of my friends, I forgot who it was, when we were talking about it, he said, how are you performing? You got to get money to put gas in your car. I said, man, I'm not getting paid. I'm just doing it. I got to give back. And he said something that's so simple, and I felt so dumb after he said it because sometimes when you get too close to things, you can't see them because they're just blurred. He said, you got to get before you give back. He said, what have you gotten? I'm like, nothing. He said, so what are you giving back? I'm like, he said, you're not giving back, man. You're giving away. And at that point, I was like, yeah, man, I need to go where someplace I can make some money. And like you said, I retired undefeated on the Apollo. So now I'm an Apollo legend. I'm a National Poetry Slam champion. So I was like, I had the opportunity to go to New York because one of my friends who I knew from Detroit, he was like, man, I'm moving to New York. I said, yeah, I got to make that move too. And so he remembered me saying that. And he was like, listen, my roommate is moving out. I remember you saying that, you always wanted to move to New York. And so do you still want to do it? And at that time, I was thinking about where I could go. And it was like New York and Atlanta and California. And New York was heavy on my mind. So when I got that phone call, I'm like, okay, I got a safety net. I got a roommate, so I don't have to worry about some real exorbitant rent. And I got somebody out there who I know who can help me walk through stuff. So I'm like, okay. And then it was like, but do I really want to leave Cleveland? Like, am I ready for that move? Am I ready for the big city? And I had conversations with multiple people about being ready. And, one of my friends, God puts wonderful people in front of you. And there was a sister who I used to get advice from. And we were at the table when we were eating. She said, what is this? I said, ketchup. I'm like, she said, how do you know it's ketchup? I'm like, because it's ketchup. It looks like ketchup is, I'm putting it on my French fries. She said, how do you know it's not mustard? I'm like, it's ketchup. And then she was like, did it tell you it wasn't ketchup? Did it tell you it was ketchup? I'm like, no, but look at the label. The bottle is ketchup. She said, exactly. You don't have to tell anybody who you are. Just be who you are. And people will recognize it. So you're wondering what you're going to be when you go out there. She said, just go out there and be ketchup. Be you. And that took me to a different place where it's like, wow, I'm up here wondering how I'm going to prove to the world I am me without actually considering that I just need to be me. And after that, that I got the confidence to move. And I'm like, as they say, packed up the truck and moved to Beverly. And I just went out there. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how I was going to really survive and make money because, like I said, I was struggling in Cleveland. But I'd saved up a little dough, so I was just like, you know what? We just going to go out here and we're going to see what happens. And literally, I went out there and I just stepped out on that faith, man. And God was good and everything worked out, and started making money. I started walking into places like, hey, you want to feature here? You heard about you want to feature here. a lot of people from New York didn't even believe I was from Cleveland. Because I came in, they're like, oh, man, we knew you from New York. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, because after we saw you on Apollo, we're like, ain't nothing that dope coming out of any place but New York, especially Cleveland. And so now that we see you out here, we knew you were from New York. I said, dude, I just moved out here. I'm from Cleveland. And they were like, for real? I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm from Cleveland. And they were just like, wow, never would have thought it, And after that, man, Cleveland, we got to hustle. So I just went out there and got on the grind. And that was it, man. It was just, it's one of those things where it was some thought, but not a whole lot of thought, because if I thought about it too much, I wouldn't have done it. I would have talked myself out of it. So I just ran, man. I was like, I got to do it. And it was funny when I moved to New York, all of a sudden I became a viable market in Cleveland. People wanted to pay me. People wanted to give me money to show up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Back in Ohio. And I was like, wow. Because I didn't get my first paying gig, at like Kent State until I moved. Because Oconto was there, and I would come down there and visit Oconto. And I guess their philosophy was, well, why we got to pay him? If Oconto call him, he gonna come. And so Oconto was like, I'm not gonna call you down here because they think they're gonna get you through me. And Oconto was like, for that, you're not coming down here to do anything. And when I moved in New York, all of a sudden, oh, he's in New York now, blah blah blah. All of a sudden, I'm doing stuff at Kent State, And not to say I didn't get any payment in Ohio, but it was sparse and very few. So maybe, let's say for every 10 gigs, I maybe got 2 gigs that paid me, something near what I was worth or something sustainable. The other ones was like $25 for gas, or we'll give you food or something. So it was real. So, and it was crazy. I guess in hindsight, since I didn't have much I was banking on in Cleveland, it made it easier to leave because the only thing that I was leaving really was familiarity. Like, if you were from a city, like I grew up between Cleveland and Chicago, but I spent the majority of my years in Cleveland. I mean, you know how to make money. You can hustle if you got half a brain. You know who you can go to hit up for a job. You can go hit up for a loan. If things get tight, I got about 5 different places I can shuffle through, if I need a place to lay my head. So it was easy and comfortable for me to live as an artist in Cleveland without fear of crashing. And I think that once I realized I didn't have that much to lose, and, after you've been broke once, being broke twice ain't a big thing. I was like, I can, what do I got to lose? The worst thing I could do is come back to Cleveland with my tail tucked between my legs and saying it didn't work.
Right.
And it was just like, they literally packed up the car, gave everybody a salute, kind of snuck out of town because I didn't want to hear anybody's, oh man, where you going? This ain't gonna work. Because people will talk you out of stuff.
Yes.
And so I stopped by DC to spend some time with my brother. And he's like, what you doing? I said, I'm going to New York. And I had all my clothes piled up in the back of my car, in my trunk, everything. The stuff that I couldn't carry, I left with a friend. And I'm like, yo, dude, I'm going to New York. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah. Because I didn't tell anybody. Because I didn't want to hear any no's. But he was real supportive. And, yeah, man, next thing you know, I'm in New York and kicking it and having fun.
Okay. We're going to pick up the New York story right after we come back from this break. You're listening to Open Door Cleveland with Vince Robinson. My guest is Anthony, the Boogieman Rucker, right here on 95.9 FM WOVU. We'll be right back. What can you do in the battle against COVID-19? Your first task, wear a mask, protect yourself and others. Armor up, armor up. Give those hands a 20-second shower with soap and water. Armor up, armor up. Give others space 6 feet just in case. Armor up, armor up. Get good nutrition, ingest for digestion. Armor up, armor up. Vitamin C, D3, and more. Armor up, armor up. Elderberries, zinc, and echinacea from the store. Get some fresh air. Go climb some stairs. Let go of stress. Make sure you rest. Your breath is the key to life. Strengthen your immune system, follow the guidelines, and win the battle against COVID-19.
Armor up, armor up.
You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest is Anthony the Boogieman Rucker. He is a spoken word artist, and he's also a doctoral candidate for a degree in applied clinical psychology. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the hour. But let's go back. You were talking, before we took the break, you were talking about making that transition from Cleveland to New York, how you may have had some reservations, but somebody said something to you that really turned the light on in your head and caused you to make that paradigm shift. You got to New York, and then you started hustling, and you started getting gigs, and now all of a sudden you're getting acceptance back in Cleveland. And as you were describing that scenario, I was thinking about how tragic it is that folks here in Cleveland kind of take you for granted until you go somewhere and come back. You were the same person that you were before you left, but you go to a place like New York and then you come back, and then now all of a sudden people are seeing value in you and are willing to pay you for what you do when they wanted it for free before you left.
Yeah, I mean, so think about it. Bone Thugs and Harmony couldn't get a manager in Cleveland. Like, they're like, you rap too fast, nobody knows what you're talking about, you're not going to hit. And all of a sudden, they go out of town, they follow Eazy-E around, he listens to him like, okay, I'm going to put you on, and ends up taking care of him, teaching them the business. But think about it, they couldn't get a manager in Cleveland. Like, they were doing gigs, they were doing the Glenville Festival, they were rocking and stuff, but nobody was really putting that much effort into them. So, I mean, it seems like there's a thing in Cleveland, you have to leave and come back. But I think that's a little bit of every place except for like the big cities. You know what I'm saying? Or like the known hubs. But if you're just from some, backwoods someplace, you got to leave first and then come back. And though Cleveland is considered a major thoroughfare in arts and culture, it seems that it still has a small town mentality where, okay, we like you, but until the rest of the world like you, we ain't down. Mm-hmm. And so it's rough. You know what I'm saying? And also, I think because Cleveland, even though people don't realize it, it's such a poor city. You know what I'm saying? And it's so hard that, people are looking for, and I'm not saying the shortcut, but, they're looking for a camaraderie. They're looking for like a venture, like, hey, let's do this together. But what I don't think people realize is that as an artist, that's your food. That's your rent. It's not like saying, hey, man, you got a lawnmower, let me borrow it. And it's like, well, I'm going to charge you for it. Why are you charging me for it? Like, it's a lawnmower. It's like, okay, you're right. Just put gas in it, make sure it's good, bring it back. I mean, you're not losing anything except you can't mow your grass while they have it. But with your art, people are like, oh, come on, man, just do this for me. Just do this for me. And it's like, this is what I do for a living. If I don't get paid for this, I can't eat. I can't put gas in my car. You know what I'm saying? I can't pay rent. And I don't think people really understand art as a job or just art in anything, whether it's acting, singing, dancing. They just think, oh, man, all you doing is singing. It's like, no, I'm doing what you do when you go to work. I'm doing what you do for your 8 hours. This is what I do for mine. And I don't think people get that, and they look at it like, oh, you're going to have another job. You're going to be all right. Or they think someone else is paying you. I think Lionel Richie summed it up before. Lionel said literally, I'm the best and worst thing that's happened to you. And I'm like, how you figure? He said, because you're working with me, everybody's going to think you have it made. Everybody's going to think that I'm just giving you money, that all of a sudden now that you're hanging around with me, that you have all the trappings of me. And so people are always going to look to you to either get something or do something for free. And he said, it's like this. He said, before Lionel Richie, I could go and get a haircut for $15, $10, $20. He said, once I became Lionel Richie, I can't get a haircut for less than $50. He said, if I walk into a place that's charging $15 for a haircut, it's going to be $50 when I sit down. He said, that's just the way it is. And so people assume that your association or your juxtaposition to fame and fortune means you have it. And let's understand, there's a lot of broke people who work for a lot of rich people. Just because you're next to it does not mean you have it or have access to it. It just means you're next to it. And so people thought that because I was talented, I had a bunch of people just giving me money. And it wasn't so. It's like I had opportunities for money, but I hadn't realized them yet. And so it was one of those things where, you know, like I said, I don't want to put Cleveland on a pedestal like it's the only one. But I mean, we also used to call Cleveland Cell Block C. That's what artists used to claim. You know, we used to call it Cell Block C. Like you got to leave it and get famous to come back. But like I said, I think that's with a whole lot of stuff, you know, like the song Leaving on the Midnight Train to Georgia, you know. You know, he came out from Georgia looking for something that he didn't find, but it's the same principle. Sometimes you leave to find this light that you're looking at, this thing that you believe in, and then, you know, you find out, wow, it's not what I thought it was. And then you break camp and like, okay, I'm back. Or sometimes you make it. But yeah, it's one of those things, man. It's strange.
Okay. So before we leave New York and go to California, I just want to talk about what it was like for you to live in New York City after living in what some consider, and I'm just being pejorative if you want to take it that way, but some consider Cleveland a cow town. So you go from this city where you can get from one side to the other literally in 20 minutes or less, and now you're in New York. Everybody's taking cabs. Nobody's driving cars. What was it like for you to make the transition from small town Cleveland to big town New York City?
Man, I was like a bad ghetto movie. You know, just the stereotypical everything, man. I was walking around with my mouth open. I didn't understand anything. I mean, it was so fun because, I mean, like from Cleveland, you don't hear people talking about like the expanse of the Latino population. Like in New York, if you mix up a Dominican for a Puerto Rican, you in a fight. If you mix up a Trinidadian for a Belizean or a Jamaican or Trinidadian, it's a fight. Like, you know, you don't know. So I'm from Cleveland. You either black or you Spanish. And, you know, and I'm getting all of these lessons and I'm like, oh my goodness. It's like you're walking down the street and, you know, small town. So I'm walking down the street and I'm walking with my roommate, and the dude looks at me, hey man, what's up? And the dude looks at me, eyes me. When he walks, he turns backwards and he's walking backwards. And I'm looking at him, I said, dude, did I say something wrong? All I did was say, what's up? He said, you know, man, people don't rock like that out like this. When they say what's up to you, something like that, they're trying to sell you something or they want something. I'm like, wow. So at one point, I was walking down the street and I just raised my hand. I said, get out of here. And my boy said, what are you doing? I said, I'm practicing to be a good New Yorker. I'm talking to this mailbox. Like when I say get out of here, it's going to move. I'm like, this is how I feel. New Yorkers will talk to inanimate objects and expect a reaction. And it was just wild, man. I didn't know how to react. I was in awe all the time. I used to say that, I still say New York has its own gravity and own laws of physics. It's like everything that you think you know, when you go to New York, you'll question it. Like, wow, this is, and you just don't know. So literally, I'm walking around enthralled, amazed, overwhelmed. You know, you're walking down the street and you just see people. You just see people. And it's just like, well, hold, wait a minute. You know, that's that person right there. That's that famous person. That's this, that's that. And you're just walking like, oh my goodness. Like, you know, in Cleveland, you have to go search for somebody famous. In New York, you could be just walking down the street. Like one day I was walking down the street and I saw a dude like that looked like Damon Wayans. And when he walked by, I looked at him and he knew that, I guess he knew what was happening because the way I was looking, and he just started grinning and he just nodded his head. And it was Damon Wayans. And he's walking down the street by himself, no bodyguards, no entourage, just walking down the street. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. Then all of a sudden, you know, you going over Avio Doom's house, and I knew them from Black Poetic days because, you know, after the Last Poets came to Cleveland, they adopted Black Poetic. And I don't know if a lot of people knew that. Like, we got their numbers, we stayed in touch with them, still in touch with them to this day. And so, hey, you're in New York now, come by on Sundays. So you come by on Sundays, and I mean, everybody comes through there. Entombed comes through there. You know what I'm saying? You know, Diggable Planets came through there. I mean, you're looking up, and these people are just coming in on a Sunday, and they're just chilling. No place to go. No, hey, I got to go. Sitting up here, eating salmon croquettes and all this other kind of food and chilling, and everybody's singing. And Dune has a piano. So people be playing the piano, other people singing. And so I was just in this world. And then you go to these jazz spots and these music spots, and I was just like, I was in like artist heaven, man. I didn't know how to act. Like I said, I was like a bad ghetto movie, like, you know, when you have all of the incorrect behaviors in these spots and the etiquette. And I'm like, I had no idea of the etiquette. I was just all over the place, man. And there's nothing that prepares you for New York. Like, I've been in California. I lived in Chicago. You know, I've been through like Atlanta and all these other different cities. But New York is a place it's in and of itself. Like, you can't understand New York unless you actually go to New York. So I was a proverbial fish out of water, man, and I just learned to make my way. And then what I learned was the way that you survive in New York is just be you, like what I was told. You know, it's not going to be one thing where you fit in exactly or perfectly. You just have to find your niche, do you, and stay out the way. But like I said, man, it was, man, like the amount of art, you know, just, I mean, even being on the train, and you see people performing on the train, but when you're on a crowded train and you see people break dancing, flipping off the ceiling, holding the bars and flipping around. And I mean, I ain't talking about necessarily short dudes, tall dudes, and they're doing all of this with people around them. And it was just like, wow, every time you look up somebody singing, everybody got a hustle. You're walking down, you know, in Times Square and you're seeing all of these big marquees for all of these plays and stuff. And you realize, like, man, anything artistically you want to do can be done in this space. Like, there's not one artistic expression that you won't see in New York. And then it becomes overwhelming because it's like, dang, what do I do? You know, how do I fit in? And then you realize that you fit in, that by doing just what you do, people will notice you and they'll be, hey, man, you're kind of good at this. Come over here. Or you're kind of good at this. Come over here. And it's actually ingratiating on that level because it's not the competition that you would see in Cleveland. Like, well, I can't bring him here because he's going to be better than me. Or I want to get this down because, you know, I don't want to be competing because there's just so little resources. In New York, if they could benefit off of you, they was like, hey, come on, let's do this. And they were very upfront. Like, if they didn't like you, they didn't like you. Like in California, they'll be like, hey, let me get back to you and never call you. In New York, they'll be like, no, I'm all right. Just straight up. And so it was just a different level of just honesty and forthrightness where you had to get used to it because you would take it as a sign of respect. It was just a sign of the way they did stuff. So, like, I was totally out of water, man. And it took, as the sailors say, it took a while for me to get my sea legs. But once I got them, man, I was great. You know, I loved it. Okay. You know, I actually miss New York.
Okay. All right. So we're going to take a break right now, and we're going to talk about California. You've kind of opened my eyes up to a few things with that conversation, and I'm just wondering how things are right now based on the circumstances that we're dealing with. And I'll give you an opportunity to give me some conjecture on that when we come back. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson. My special guest is Anthony the Boogieman Rucker. We'll be right back right here on 95.9 FM WOVU, a Burton Bell Car community radio station.
Open Door Cleveland looks at the lives of people here and abroad, navigating the realms of art, culture, and society. I'm Vince Robinson. Tune in for inspired conversation with an array of guests and subject matter experts right here on 95.9 FM WOVU, Monday mornings at 11. Stream us live at WOVU.org or enjoy us live by purchasing the WOVU app from your favorite app store. Open Door Cleveland, Monday mornings at 11 on 95.9 FM WOVU, a Burtonville Car community radio station.
We are WOVU 95.9 FM. Our voices united. United to enhance our community. United to be a beacon of hope. United to empower our community. WOVU 95.9. Our voices united.
Okay, we are back with Anthony, the Boogieman Rucker, spoken word artist and doctoral candidate for a degree in applied clinical psychology. And we've been talking about New York City, the Big Apple, skyscrapers and everything, and a brother that was walking around with his mouth wide open, staring at him and learning the cultural differences between a small town like Cleveland and a big city like New York. I'm just imagining that space that you described that opened up at midnight and went until 9 o'clock in the morning, and all these folks coming through and poetry and music and all of that, and then wondering how things are now.
Wow. So, like I guess I'm in California now. And so California is absolutely different. California, everything is about image. It's all about what you do. Like, for instance, my god brother is a comedian. He's fairly famous, but in different circles, you're cool. Like in poetic circles, you don't have to be a big time poet to be cool with a big time poet, because it's like you respect the hustle. So literally, I was outside of a comedy spot, and this is some years back. I was outside of a comedy spot because I think it was Tommy Davidson had just done a show. And so when I say the who's who of like what black comedy, like the Wayans brothers was there, Greer was there. I forgot his first name. David Allen. All of these people is David Allen Greer was there. And and they're just walking around talking to each other, right? And I'm standing up against the wall because I just got finished doing a recording session. I've been in the studio all day. And so I'm up against the wall, and these girls like, so who are you? And I'm like, huh? They're like, who are you? I'm just like, I'm just want to go hang out with my god brother and get some food. Like, I'm not interested in hollering at anybody, and I'm not starstruck because, hell, I just been in the studio with Lionel Richie all day. I'm like, I'm good. So I'm standing against the wall, and they're just like, I'm like, nobody. They're like, oh, no, you're somebody. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, how are you getting this? They're like, and they literally pointed out, they said, look at what's going around you. And I'm like, I'm looking around like, and she said, everybody is trying to talk to somebody. Everybody is trying to get to know somebody. Everybody's trying to connect to somebody. And they said, and the only person that's not talking to anybody is you. So either you're crazy or you're connected. And I was just like, wow. And they're like, and for the fact that you don't look like you connected, we want to, and I'm like, dude, I ain't nobody. I'm like, I'm just out here. I said, you see that dude? That's my god brother. I'm out here with him. And he heard me. He said, oh, so you were just hanging with, and he mentioned Skip Miller, rest in power, who was one of the people who, like, he set Motown up. Like, he was one of the people who really pushed Motown into the forefront. He's a former president of Motown. He helped put Loud together. He found Wu-Tang. He worked on SWV's first album, like, just a king in the business. And he started, I said, come on, man, be quiet. And they're like, I knew you were somebody, but literally, think about this. Because I wasn't networking, because I wasn't trying to get to know somebody, they knew that something was different about me, because that's such the culture out here. So the first thing people ask you when out here is, hey, what do you do? Not who are you? Like, what kind of person are you? Like, what do you do? And so out here, it's strange. Like, being out here was one of the reasons my career died, because in New York, I was able just to establish myself and be like, okay, oh, you're in Boogie, this, that, and the other. Out here, you're walking around $1 million and $1 billion studios. Like, you'll drive by a CBS studio. You'll drive by, the Sony shooting, the Sony movie lot. And so out here, it is such an expanse of money and power and influence that unless you can just immediately impact somebody's bottom line, they don't care who you are. because there's bigger fish to fry. Like out here, you will see somebody famous just sitting, like if you go down Sunset or go on Rodeo, you just see somebody famous, like really famous, out doing their things in their Lamborghinis and their Rolls Royces. And so for me, it was an absolute culture shock again, but in a negative way. I was like, wow. And to give you my summarization of Los Angeles, people say, what do you think of Los Angeles? I said, I like the weather. I said, but if I could, I would move my people from Cleveland out here and send the people from Cleveland, from California to Cleveland, and then we would take over this and make it a Mecca. But like for me, it is, and I'm not saying all people, but for the most part, it is so plastic and such a facade. And it's like, you know, it gets to the point where it gets daunting. Like you don't even want to speak or put out, because since I've been out here, I've had 30 million people like, oh man, I'm going to call you. Give me your number. And I mean, literally just trying to impress me with the fact that we're going to work together or do something, and then never hear from them. Like not a peep. And it's just like, you could have just said, nice to meet you. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to impress upon me like we're going to do something together because I have a talent. And so, you know, the career went down, and I'm like, well, I used to make too much money, and I had too much of a lifestyle to sit up and do grunt work, because California is one of the most strict legal environments you're going to be in. I mean, it is so rough to do anything unless you have some paperwork behind your name. And so since I had left college, before I graduated, there were a lot of jobs that I had experience for that I couldn't get. And, you know, what was I doing? I was living as an artist for the last, you know, how many ever years. So I'm like, didn't have anything to put on my resume. And so I was doing grunt work, and I was like, I would rather go back and go to school and be able to make a living than to sit up here and do grunt work and try to rebuild my career, because I was working so much to help make ends meet with my wife and my kids that I didn't have time for a career. I didn't have time to do anything.
Okay.
And so that's how I ended up going back to school.
All right. So I'm going to read between the lines and assume that the difference in you and experience that you had in New York versus Los Angeles was one of the things that drove you to this paradigm shift from spoken word to clinical psychology. Talk about that transition. You know, you kind of mentioned why it happened, but, you know, I'd also have to assume that clinical psychology was probably something that you had an interest in when you were in school earlier, and then the spoken word piece took off. So talk about your relationship and interest in clinical psychology. So what happened was around Cleveland State, there was a guy named Walter, and everybody kept saying, oh, he's an opera star. He's an opera star. And I'm like, this joker worked downtown. And when I talked to him, he was like, listen, he said, until you make the big money, he said, always keep a second job as an artist, so you will have some form of pension or something coming in and some other form of income, so you don't have to pimp yourself out for your art. So my philosophy was, until I hit it big, I'm always going to keep a side job. And most people didn't know, but I kept my side job in mental health. I worked at group homes, you know, and at one point I was actually, and when I was in Cleveland, as the Boogieman, I was running a unit at a girls' home for parenting and non-parenting girls. And so I've always had a background in mental health, because you had to take continuing education in psychology to maintain your employment. So I really got hooked into psychology and the workings of it. And I was like, man, if I do anything, I would do this, because it's so much like what a poet does. You look at people, you analyze them, you try to get inside, figure out what's going on with them, you know, and you basically, instead of writing poems, you give sessions, you talk to people, but it's still the same thing. You're trying to get them to see or understand an idea or concept, or let them know that you understand it. And then also I saw what it did to people. Like I wrecked one of my classes and that's what really got me into it. It was actually my first official psychology class that I took inside the university, because I was taking continuing education credits. And they were talking about id versus ego. And, you know, and so I started thinking, because I'm about application and everything, I'm practical application. If I can't find a practical application, I don't want it.
And so I asked, I was thinking about America and how it fit in this. So I asked the professor, I said, what if a group of people were id-driven for like years, centuries, and that was the predominant behaviors they were in, id-driven, like they were always seeking to satisfy the id, and the ego and the super ego were just like on the side, like no real morals or values, and the ego's not really checking it in. It was just benefiting from it. He said, well, that would be a sick people, who would really need to be studied because, to be id-driven for centuries, this, that, and the other. And I said, well, was slavery an id or super ego-driven thing? Now, at this point, if he says super ego, he's done. Like, it's going to be a riot in the class. And so he said, slavery was definitely an id-driven thing. I said, so based on what you just said, the forefathers and people who peddled this are sick people who need to be. Look, I didn't say that. I said, and the other black people in the past said, no, yes, you did. and he wouldn't answer the question. He said, you're just clear, the typical societal answer when you ask a tough question along ethnic lines or race lines. You're just here to start trouble. And so I would ask these questions. Every time we learned about something, I would apply it to my life. And it got to the point where he literally, for the rest of the semester, said, I'm not calling on you. You just want to cause trouble. You don't have any real idea or concept of wanting to know. You just want to just cause trouble in the class. And I'm thinking like, wow, he is saying applying what he's teaching me to my life is troublesome and doesn't really have any meaning. And I saw the effect that it had on him, but also saw the effect that it had on my classmates. Because they would be, hey, write down the question and we'll ask it. And literally, when they would ask a question like, you got that from him, I'm not answering. And he would literally not answer any question that I asked in the class because I always applied it to what was going on. Like, I never did some clinical study. Well, I'm thinking about this. I'm like, how does that apply to what we live in now, to the people in our history? And then I realized, like, wow, there's a power in this outside of what we as people of color have taught. Because we think it's just, oh, you go in there and get analyzed, this, that, and the other. And then I realized, like, no, they just literally study people. And, of course, they studied white people in the beginning, and that was a paradigm for everything. But then I started realizing, like, there's power in this. And I started learning to use it. And so I always had that background. I always was analyzing people as far as psychology. Like, before, I just was interested in how people thought. Like, since I was 16, I was trying to figure out why an artist can make somebody cry with their art. But then with psychology, it crystallized it. Like, oh, there's a study for this. There's people who actually do this. Because I'm thinking psychology was just for crazy people. I'm black. It's like, oh, psychologist, so you must be crazy or white, But then when I started learning, oh, this is the crystallization, what I've been doing since I was 16, trying to figure out how people work. And after that, I was hooked. Like now, I'm reading so many different psychology books right now on the makeup of the mind and the mind-body connection. It's a love and a drive for me. And it actually helps me with my poetry and my art because it gives me a better understanding of how people work and how to appeal to them, how to come to them. So it's just one of those things where it's just like, it was a perfect match.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay. We're going to explore that connection between psychology and the spoken word when we come back. We're rounding third and headed home. We'll be right back with more Open Door with Vince Robinson and my special guest, Anthony the Boogieman Rucker, on 95.9 FM, WOVU.
Hey Cleveland, you can now listen to one of the hottest radio stations on your phone. Yes, that's right. WOVU 95.9 FM has a new mobile app. And did I mention that it's free? You can download our app in Google Play or in the Apple Store. Just type in WOVU 95.9 FM. Now you don't have to stay in that hot car trying to catch every beat. You can listen to us while you're getting ready for work, while you're making dinner, or while you're winding down after a long day of work. What are you waiting for? Go ahead and download our app right now. And make sure you keep it locked on WOVU 95.9 FM.
You work so hard.
This is Aja Jones,
Tracy Clark,
Kiko,
Yolanda Armstrong,
Brian Webster.
This is TC Lewis, and you are listening to WOVU 95.9 FM.
So we just took a deep dive into psychology, clinical psychology with Anthony, the Boogieman Rucker, right here on Open Door. And now we want to explore the connection. You mentioned at the top of the hour or the top of the show that you have gotten back and reconnected with your art, and you're also pursuing a doctorate in applied clinical psychology. Talk about the relevance as you are speaking of it before we took the break.
So, I think it was James Baldwin said that, people develop a piece, and get comfortable where they're at, and it's the artist's job to disturb that piece. He also said to be a Negro in America, to be relatively conscious, is to be in a constant state of rage. And when you start looking at it, the history of poets and artists, they were the social commentarians. They're the ones who challenged thought. They're the ones who challenged the status quo. They're the ones who, were instrumental in proposing, conflicting ideas with the status quo and challenging people. But they also were some of the biggest insightful voices when it came to the inner workings of people. Shakespeare, the world is just a play and we're just players on it and whatever. And it's like, wow, you start thinking like, man. And when I started looking at my work, I was making social commentary. I was commenting based on how I think people, live and move. Think about the last post. The white man's got a God complex. You know what I'm saying? That is a social and a psychological commentary. The revolution will not be televised. You won't be able to tune in, and it's like that again is a social commentary about what Gil Scott-Heron thought was the overarching concept that people had of revolution and what they thought they were going to be doing. Like, you're not going to be able to watch this on TV. So what he was saying is, a lot of y'all think y'all going to watch this like a TV show. And he's like, no, the revolution will be live. And so if you look at any great poet, they've had commentary, whether it's on themselves, the world around them, their relationships. There's always a psychological aspect because we're psychological people. We are a mental people. We're a spiritual people. We have that aspect to us. And so what happens is, what I learned was that the two are not disconnected. So there's a saying in Eastern medicine, the only place the mind, the body, and the spirit are separate are in textbooks. And so I start looking for the synergy. I start looking at the sustainability, like, wow, this is that, and this is that. So now basically how I build myself is not only as a poet, but as a social commentarian, as someone who is not only writing poetry about life, but is making what I believe a valid psychological and sociological argument for what I'm presenting. So now not only can you listen to this as a poem, you can use this as a literary piece or critique on society, on the state of relationships, on mentality. So in other words, I have one poem where in it I say, tears have incarcerated more men than prison. Emotions have emasculated more men than slavery. And so I start talking about how the expression of emotions have led to the belittling of men. But then you can go to the psychological aspect where there's psychological studies that have been done that show that men are more emotional than women, but they express themselves and was considered more negative matters. In other words, more bravado, more aggression, more distancing, more aloofness, because the softer side of the expressions are not accepted. So women and people, even men, think that we are less emotional and that, we're these hard people, but literally it's that we experience the same emotions, but based on how they're received, we express them in a more acceptable or masculine manner. And so now my psychology and my poetry are meeting because I wrote that poem before I understood that psychological phenomenon as a fact of psychology. That was just, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And so now I'm learning that there's a whole lot of overlap. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like the overlap is ridiculous. And so now I'm understanding that if poets actually took their poetry one step further and said, you know what, past my opinion, what do I think this is generally saying about the state of America, of the world, of relationships, of race, of ethnicity, of religion, and put it in there, you would start having them write papers, expository, that will resemble a lot of what we know to be true based on study from sociology to psychology to even medical medicine. And it's like, when you realize that, you realize, like, you know, we have to stop accenting the differences and start highlighting the similarities, because what we're finding is we're taking different paths to get to the same thing. Psychologists take study. Artists take painting. Poets take poetry. Sculptors take sculpture, but they're really doing the same thing. They're expressing the state and nature of the human condition as they see it and as they experience it. And so the different roads going to the same path. And so if we start looking at them in their totality, we get a better understanding. So, and I mean, even let's take racism in America. If you look at the racist monuments that are constructed in America and at the times that they're constructed, and then look at the artistic expressions of the people who are the subject of that racism, everything makes sense. Because you see a people losing power and influence, and people who are fighting to to gain it, and then you see their different expressions, and you can see how this conflicts. Because over here they're trying to deny humanity, while over here they're trying to affirm humanity. Over here they're trying to hold on to power, while over here they're trying to gain power. Those are conflicts. And so when you start looking at them in their totality, it makes a whole lot of sense. But if you look at them individually, that's just artistic expression. So that's where I'm at now. All of my art is a commentary. You know, it is a critique of not only the human condition, but what I think could be solutions or answers, if there are such things, to the human condition. What I think are the problems underlying the human condition, but it's also my personal expression of what I'm experiencing. But the two are not separate like they would be in textbooks. Oh, that's just your personal opinion. That's social commentary. How can you have one that's not the other?
You know, as you describe this, I'm kind of seeing an intersection between you as an educator, because I'm assuming that Dr. Rucker is going to be an educator with the ability to reach students through a medium that they're familiar with. I can just imagine you standing at the front of the classroom and you got, well, you know, we're in a virtual world right now, but you know, at some point you'll be standing in that lecture hall and there'll be 200 students sitting in front of you, and then you'll do one of your pieces and their mouths will drop.
Yeah. And actually, it's, again, life, you know, and art mimic each other. Which one does what? When I was in my doctorate, you know, applied clinical psychology, just for a quickly, is the catch-all. So in other words, it's not a specialty. So I was in applied clinical psychology. You learn to work with everybody from, you know, little children to the elderly, and you work in all aspects of it. So during one of my classes, we were having to learn how to incorporate art and artistic expression into things. And my professor, who has been at this for like 20 or 30 years, she looked at me, she said, "You are really good at this." She said, "You might want to specialize in it." And it was funny because Sage, the founder of Black Poetic, he told me the same thing, and I kind of brushed it off. Again, the prophet is not without honor, saving his own country. But literally, when they saw the ideas and concepts I had of using art, like everybody just looked at me and like, "How'd you get this?" I was like, "Well, I'm an artist." Like, you know, I was an artist before I was a psychologist, you know, so this is more natural to me, an expression, than, you know, probing people. And literally everybody was like, "Yeah, you need to do this. You need to do this." And, you know, listening to Sage, I told them, "Yeah, man," they said the same thing. So I've always been thinking of how I'm going to incorporate the two and make them work, for whoever I'm doing it with. But yes, I do plan on always using art and artistic expression,
yes,
of some kind to probe it and to challenge people.
Okay. We have just a few minutes left, but I also want to give you an opportunity to talk about the things that you're doing artistically right now. And I don't want to gloss over the fact that you said that you were working with Lionel Richie. I mean, there are a whole bunch of folks who would be like, damn, Lionel Richie? So what are you working on creatively within the spoken word realm? And I think you also mentioned a film and a book.
So I'm working, COVID has you locked up. So I produced 4 books last year in everything. So I did a poetry book. I did a book on spirituality. I did a book on relationships. So what I'm working on in the artistic field now, I'm working on a CD. That's most of the music is being done by Eric Troy. He is a local artist, and he's Black Poetic member. So I'm working on that. I'm working on a one-man poetry play called Black President in the Age of Anti-Hip-Hop. And it is my commentary about the years of Barack Obama as president and what I saw in America and everything. And then I have another poetry book that I'm working on called Cobalt Blue, which is it's a collection of random thoughts. And then one called If God, and it's like my spiritual tithe. So that's what I'm doing as far as poetry. And then I have other things that, I'm doing as far as other books that I'm writing, because I'm always writing and reading something in the area of profession. So I just wrote a book called True Game. I've actually been toying with a book of translations to teach men and women how to understand each other. Because when I do couples counseling or coaching or therapy, the one thing I find out is men and women really don't understand each other. They know each other on a very superficial level when it comes to inner workings, but not that. But like I said, back to the art, like I said, the one-man play and a couple of books that I'm working on. And then I have plays and other stuff that I'm working on in social commentary. But yeah, I'm always staying busy. COVID has me, just like sequestered. So I'm writing or reading or doing something on a daily basis. And like I said, working on the CD, but the CD got kind of pushed back because I was supposed to write it, and then I was supposed to come out to Cleveland to sit down with Eric in his studio that he has in his crib and work out some stuff and get singers and stuff. But COVID has put that down, so I don't know when that's going to happen. When it becomes safe to do some interstate travel and stuff like that. I know people are doing it, but I'm a little bit more cautious because I just take this stuff seriously, and I've lost people to it. So, yeah. But yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm just creating and expressing, and and looking for a means to put it out, or a break in the monotony where we can actually come outside and do stuff.
Okay.
So people can see what's going on.
Well, I got to tell you, brother, you working with Eric Troy. And Eric Troy is just a phenomenal musician, composer, performer, all of those things. So whatever you guys put together, I know for a certainty that it's going to be off the chain. I am so grateful to you for having this conversation today, and I'm looking forward to doing this online where we can see each other and the world can see you and maybe get a taste or two of some of your poetry. But we're going to put that on the shelf for now and come back to it. So thanks for joining me on Open Door today, Anthony the Boogieman Rucker.
Man, thanks for thinking of me. Calling me, because it's like I've been seeing you with Okanta, who's been like a mentor forever.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, man, me and Vince got to catch up because we haven't really caught up since Humidor and
right.
6th Street Under Days,
Right.
and all that other kind of stuff. And I'm seeing you, I'm like, man, he's doing this thing. I'm like, we got to catch up. So when you called, I'm like, oh, there you go. That's the spirit working.
Absolutely. It was definitely the spirit that led me to call you today. And again, I thank you for that. And I look forward to the next conversation. I'd like to thank the listeners for listening. And as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make today your best day.